All right, everyone. So, in order to honor our time together, because 2 hours go by very quickly when we're having fun, and we know that's exactly what's going to happen today, I just want to say thank you for being here. Welcome you on behalf of the entire Supporting Inclusive Practices team. We want to thank you for joining us today on this 2-day journey as we explore the connection between play and academic foundations across all lanes of California's universal pre-kindergarten mixed delivery system. I'm thrilled to have the team of experts that we have here with us today as we explore the importance of taking calculated risks and embrace the idea of play as an engine for whole child development. Just as a well-tuned engine powers a car, play is pivotal in fueling equitable access and learning for all children, and it's the vessel upon which strong academic foundations are built and carried forward. Today, our focus is going to be on cultivating play-based literacy experiences that support all of our young learners. And then session 2 on Thursday will be centered around math and will feature another panel of UPK champions. We hope that this series will take you on a journey that honors learner variability and its intersection with intentional teaching practices. And most importantly, we recognize the immense expertise that exists in our audience today. So please, although we're going to ask you to remain on mute while our panelists are presenting, we encourage you to stay active in the chat. We'll be engaging with you in the chat. We'll have opportunities for you to reflect, to connect with each other. So please make sure that the little blue box above your text field says everyone, so everyone can see the thoughts that you share today. And we just really want to say thank you so much for being here, and let's get started. I'm going to start by introducing myself, and we can go to, oops, let's skip forward one more, Julie. My name is Heather Snipes. That is little Heather right there with a football. She is a 49ers fan through and through. And you can see there, I've got Big Bird behind me in that chair. I loved Sesame Street when I was little as well. I am a program support specialist with the Supporting Inclusive Practices Project out of El Dorado County Office of Education. I'm physically located in Eureka, California, way up here in the north. Today, we're really sharing kind of some pictures of things that make you feel included. And for me, this is my team. This is our hands in the middle. You can see we've got our names on our bracelets. We were Swifties for sure. And our supervisor, Kevin, made us all these bracelets and we wore them together. But honestly, the team that we have with Supporting Inclusive Practices, the work that we do together, it's so deep and it's so meaningful. We have created relationships that go far beyond working relationships. If you don't know who our SIP team is, we are a group that is through El Dorado County Office of Education and Riverside County Office of Education. Our project is funded through the Special Education Division of the CDE, and we are focused on supporting LEAs across the state in improving outcomes for students with disabilities and really focusing on meaningful inclusion and rightful presence in the places and spaces that all students take. So we are happy to be hosting today and we're excited to get going. Okay. We want to make sure that before we get too far into it, you know that you have this resource Padlet available to you all. You see there in the chat that the Padlet link is there. You can scan it with your phone here if you would like. But we want to make sure that you have access to everything and more. I have to say and more because this Padlet has all kinds of resources in it. So the resources from today are in that session 1 column. Resources for Thursday's event are going to be in the second column, and then we've got all kinds of other resources for you. And this Padlet lives and can be added to and changed. So make sure you save that for yourself. And I'm going to hand it over to our fearless facilitator, Dr. Julie Nicholson. So welcome, Julie, and thank you so much.
Thank you. Oh, what a treat to be here. I just love working with the SIP team. this to be with such an esteemed group of co-presenters, and then with all of you, this is going to be a fantastic 2 hours together. So we're going to start with these panelist introductions, making visible, as you heard with Heather, some ideas of how we think about inclusion and belonging. And then we're going to introduce some key ideas that we see as threading throughout the conversations for both panels. Then we're going to talk a little bit about how language and literacy develop in the early childhood years. We have a short video from a panelist who is not able to be with us today, but has some really wise and important thoughts. We'll share the video. We'll respond to the video and have some conversation, all the while really looking at the chat and inviting your responses. We're then going to think about how, using that developmentally informed frame, what play-based learning looks like, because we know that play-based learning across a continuum is really central to creating inclusive environments that support all children. And then we're going to end tonight or today with thinking about, okay, we've talked about what we want to see, what the kinds of environments are that support our youngest learners to thrive, but what supports need to be in place for those environments to come to fruition. So let's dive in. So we asked each panelist to just briefly, of course, give their name, their organization, their title, so you know how they're positioned professionally, but also to think about, we thought, share a story, share a photo that represents some personal experience, some personal association you have with inclusion and belonging. And so we'll go through and have people share those stories, but as you're listening to their stories, I want you to think about all the complex sort of way in which we think about this concept of inclusion. And I think you'll see that in these different stories. So we'll start with Barbara.
Hi, my name is Barbara Jonk, and I work for San Francisco Unified School District. I'm a program administrator. I oversee our positive behavior interventions and supports team, working very closely with our SEL curriculum, and also supporting our inclusive practices work as well. This is a picture of my dance community. It's Making Wave Studios. It's in Oakland, and it's such an inclusive environment. It has every type of person, from all walks of life, young, old, and I go there and I can just really truly be myself. The music, I lose myself in the music. I love to dance, but it's also the community of people, and it just feels like a very welcoming and inclusive environment. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Barbara. And I forgot to say, I want to encourage all of our participants to think of what you don't have an opportunity to share a photo with us, but feel free to share some ideas in the chat of an experience or a place or an activity or a community that you associate with belonging and inclusion. We'd love to hear from you. Elena.
There I am. Hello, everyone. I'm so excited to be here with you all. My name is Elena Jandrid, and I am an early education support teacher at the Sonoma County Office of Education. I work with a TALK program, and TALK is TALLK, Teachers Acquiring Language Learner Knowledge. And I had been supporting teachers and coaches and implementing specific strategies to support dual language learners, emerging bilinguals, multilinguals. This is what many terms we are going to be encountering throughout all of the literature that we read. The picture that I wanted to talk about that helps me to have a sense of belonging and inclusion is the one above my picture, my own picture. And as you can see there, you see a book from Mexico, Guatemala, Vietnam, and the flag of Guatemala. So I am from Guatemala. And when I came to this classroom, that's one of the strategies that we encourage teachers to really bring artifacts, but authentic artifacts that represent our children they are enrolled in or learning, early learning settings. So when I came to this preschool classroom and saw that the teachers were already implementing that strategy, it made me so happy because I saw that one of the teachers there is from Guatemala as well. So I felt included and I felt like a sense of belonging because I see my flag, I see a book about Guatemala, and also teachers from Mexico. And they had only one child from Vietnam, but there she was represented in that classroom. So this is what I wanted to talk about, the sense of belonging and inclusion that we provide to our children. It's also, it needs to come from us as teachers, as educators. We need to model that in order to make families and children have that sense of belonging and have that welcoming environment.
Thank you, Elena. So beautiful. Julie, good name.
Yeah.
That is so true. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm so excited to be here with you. As Julie said, my name is Julie, and I am the Sacramento County Office of Education Executive Director for Early Learning. I'm also, those of you who are familiar with CPIN, our California Preschool Instructional Network, and the Executive Director for that fabulous statewide preschool professional learning group. So lots of good stuff coming out of Sacramento. And so thank you so much for having me, Heather. So one of the things that I'm doing in work-wise, and I thought about things like my family and teams I've been on, and all of that was very much in the spirit of feeling very included. But something struck me just recently that we're working on something called joyful literacy, where it's a preschool through first grade is the sort of continuum, and working with a lot of teachers and educators. And oftentimes we think these things are, really for classrooms and for people who work in classrooms. And so we actually this was a picture from a recent family event that we had at one of our nearby districts. And you can see the families, the parents all coming together and joining. We were doing this What I Like About Me book, and this, these great crowns that they got to wear, and I have other pictures where the dads are dancing together. And one of the dads said that he was actually a teacher in his home country of Afghanistan. And he said, "Oh, I never read books this way with my students. Everybody should read books this way, in this really fun, interactive, way, and just having such joy around it." And I thought, oh my goodness, that is such a great example of including teachers, leaders, families. And traditionally, sometimes I love our dads, but sometimes we think, oh, it's always the mom, but no, it's the dad too that wants to dance. So I just thought this was a great representation of inclusion.
Thank you, Julie. And before we keep going, I'm just going to reflect back some of the ideas, the themes I'm hearing in this concept of belonging and inclusion. People have talked about community, being themselves, feeling a sense that they're welcome, that it can happen in families, it can happen in work, that it's authentic, and we can be reminded of it with artifacts that often are cultural, books and flags and language. It brings about feelings of joy and joyfulness. There's communication, connection, interaction, and engagement, and it often involves other people. So children and family and communities. And some of those themes may resonate for those of you who are with us. You might have other ones. Keep them coming, and we're going to keep going through our intros. Tabitha.
Good afternoon and happy Tuesday. Excited to be with you all this gloomy Tuesday. I had to figure out which picture to put here. And the one that almost immediately came to mind was this one. This picture took about 45 minutes to take. It is a picture of myself with my family in Texas for Thanksgiving. And we were all just eating and laughing and having fun as we always do in November at my grandmother's house. And then suddenly someone said, "Hey, let's go take a picture." So if you can imagine the joy, the interaction, the engagement, trying to just herd cats. And so we took a couple pictures and realized that some people were still outdoors and others were in the back of the house. And so we had to take another couple more. And so 45 minutes later, I think we've attempted to capture everyone, and just the laughter, that you obviously can't see in this picture, but when I look at it, I just remember that 45 minutes being like, oh my goodness, can we just hurry up? And so when you talk about a sense of belonging and inclusion, for me, it's embracing my Southern roots. My parents and grandparents are from Texas, and so I love to go back there every chance I get, just to have that sense of belonging where it doesn't matter the mistakes you make, doesn't matter how much money you make, doesn't matter all the other things. It just literally is a sense of family. And so glad that I chose this picture, because even as I'm looking at it now, my heart is filled very much so with joy. And we tried to count the people, and that just wasn't working that day. So again, this is probably the 100th take of a picture that we finally captured after about 45 minutes at a Thanksgiving this past year.
Thank you, Tabitha. And I love that you're adding to our understanding of belonging through this really important theme that of inclusion and belonging often takes time. It might slow things down. We might need to slow down a process that may want to push us fast towards efficiency to say, actually, we value including everybody's voice. We value making sure that we're all here, not taking the picture in the first 10 minutes, but we're going to take 45 minutes and make sure everybody's here. And I also heard you say that inclusion belonging is about process and outcome, that we support people through the process to experience joy, welcoming, as well as we have these beautiful outcomes. So thank you so much. Jessica?
All right. Well, so many great celebrations of belonging in pictures, and like Tabitha, I struggled a little bit with some of my photo selection. And when I came across this, this isn't a family photo, but it's a photo of my early learning years of experience. And what this feeling brought to me when I looked at this photo was very much the way I feel around family. Very comfortable, very safe, and very much a part of being in community. And it for some reason, this photo resonated with me, and I had to think about it. I said to myself, why this? Because I didn't always have great school experiences. And so this was very meaningful for me. And I said, I remember these times, and I remember that I felt safe and like I belonged here. It was always about us. There was not the pressure of stress of the expectation of what to do. And it brought back good feelings, really comfortable feelings.
Thank you, Jessica. What a profound theme to bring out for all of us. We can't say that we've created an inclusive environment and say that you are included. It's got to be experienced by each person as a felt sense of safety, a felt sense of welcome, a felt sense of us, I belong here, right? And they have to feel it in their nervous system, like you said, and feel safe. So thank you so much for bringing that out. Okay, so I guess this is mine. I chose, so I'm Julie Nicholson, and I wear a lot of different hats. I train, I write books, I teach, and I'm just newly a vice president of implementation and impact at a nonprofit social impact organization called Children's Funding Project. But for my picture of inclusion and belonging I wanted to show. This is a recent picture of my 3 daughters at the San Francisco City Hall. My oldest daughter was getting married, and my daughters are my heart and soul. And when I think about inclusion and belonging, I think about the many years that we've been growing together as a family, created both through adoption and through birth, and our deep connections and regular communication with birth families. And so there's this sense of community and family across borders, integrating diverse language, culture, religious beliefs, and everyday family practices. Okay, so with that, those ideas of belonging, we wanted to, and I think, Heather, we'll have you start off. We're going to just say some brief ideas that, again, we think about as threading through the conversations for both today on literacy and Thursday on math. So setting the tone for the series.
So we really want to recognize that the UPK system is creating that bridge between the early childhood settings and early childhood experiences in order to see those successful transitions to school. And we just really want to acknowledge the fact that that bridge and those experiences are supporting future college and career success, and making that connection to the through line of what we do now affects our children throughout the rest of their life. And so we really have that opportunity to connect with their families. And for us, centering inclusion in its many different forms, we spend a lot of time talking about inclusion for students with disabilities, but as you all heard just in this introduction, inclusion comes in many different forms. And the most important piece of it is not just the inclusion part, but making sure that everyone has a real sense of belonging, of meaning, of respect in the spaces and places that we create. And this system here is really set up in a way to honor that. And so that's what we're grounding in today.
Beautiful. And then the second bullet, we just want to say everything that we talk about and that you share in the chat, our goal is not just that children learn. Of course, we want them to learn. Of course, we want them to develop. But what we really want is to create environments that support children to learn and develop in a way that optimally supports their brain neural growth, that we are laying down the architecture of their brain development in the healthiest way possible, and that they are able to learn to their absolute and develop to their absolute ability so that they thrive. And so everything we talk about today is going to be about that. Are they joyful? Are we able to support them in the way their brains and bodies are wired to learn? And are we creating that sense of safety and belonging that's going to allow them to thrive? Part of that is knowing what the research says about how children learn best. And here's what we know. Children are active. They need new learning to be connected to what's familiar to them. They need to feel their social emotional needs are met. They need to feel safe. They need to have things to be individualized, because children are developing, their brains are developing at such rapid rates in the early childhood years that development is not even. It's very individualized, and we want to account for that. And we want children to have influence in their learning. We want them to see their voices, their interests, their curiosities, informing their early learning environments. We want them to see themselves and their families there. So with that as a background, we get to the final bullet, which is that UPK is the largest initiative for preschool in the nation. It's really ambitious, really exciting to think about developing this unified system all the way up through 3rd grade that is going to be that is based in developmental science, knowledge of child development, best practice for early childhood pedagogy, inclusion and equity. And there's 2 things I want to say about that. Supporting the connection of traditional early childhood with public schooling is really complicated, because traditionally public schooling has had a really different image of the child as learner. a really different understanding of curriculum and instruction that's not traditionally been based on developmentally appropriate practice. Even the role of families has been different. So this is an exciting time for California in many ways to lead the country, to show how these two traditionally separate systems can bridge and how we can include and push up developmentally appropriate practice all the way through the elementary school. So it's a challenge and an incredible opportunity. Okay, so we wanted to start with, before we kind of dive into a video on literacy, we wanted to just set the tone for, even though we're looking at literacy today, kind of zooming in on with a focus on literacy, we wanted to make sure that we all are just remembering and thinking about how learning with young children is integrated. So what does that mean? The idea that with older children, we often think about teaching in traditional ways in terms of subject matter, like a social studies lesson or a science lesson or a math lesson, or in particular domains, like this is supporting social emotional development or cognitive development. In early childhood, children are learning all sorts of different skills across domains, across subject areas and dispositions, curiosity, risk-taking, and so on. And so we wanted to just share this little story and make this visible because, again, as we zero in and focus on literacy, we're actually going to see children learning across domains as well. So let's take a look at this. It could be a situation in any early learning program. And I want you to listen for what kinds of skills, what kind of knowledge, what kind of dispositions you hear the children or you see and sort of think about the children learning in this context. So these are 3 boys. They love to play in the blocks. They love to create games with the blocks. And in this morning, they're making a game. You can see here, he has a little block in his hand and he has a wooden ball. And he has to use this cylinder to hit the ball. And the goal is with the game that the ball goes through the shallow block here. And the children made up the rules and the game. So they said, we're going to hit the ball. It's going to go down the ramp and it's going to go through the hollow block. And then we're all winners. And yet the ball kept hitting, it kept sort of ricocheting outside and not going through. And so the children got together and they thought about what might be going on. And their first idea was that maybe the blocks aren't aligned. So you can see them here. They're aligning the blocks. Are they not aligned? Yet when they rolled the ball down, it still ricocheted off. So their next idea as they came together was maybe we remove the ramp. And Pedro says, maybe I come a little closer. So you see, but look what happens. They hit the ball, it still knocks off. So they come together for a 3rd time. And all of a sudden they're jumping up and down. They're so happy. They're joyful. They're exciting. And they're excited. Their teacher says, tell me what happened. What did you talk about? And they said, well, now we are all winners in the game. And she said, why is that? Tell me, why is that? And they said, because now the rules of the game are when you roll the ball down the blocks here and it hits and it goes off, then you win. And so that was how the boys ended up taking this context and thinking about changing the rules so that they could be winners. And they were all celebrating and jumping up and down with each other that they were winners in their game. So I want to just give you a second to just put in the chat anything. What did you notice in that little moment of time? It could have been, a 5-minute context of play-based learning in any high-quality early childhood program. What skills were those children learning? What knowledge were they gaining? What dispositions? And SIP team, do you want to just read out what you see coming in?
Teamwork.
Teamwork. Right.
Yep. Patience,
Perspective taking.
problem solving, self-correction,
Strategy, creativity,
empathy, joy, communication and collaboration, persistence,
And as you're seeing the cooperative play, we're seeing lots of social emotional skills, but there's strategy. We could imagine things that they're learning. Trust, says Michelle. Thank you. They're engaged. We could imagine thinking that they're learning about physics. They're also learning, right, about cause and effect, about developing, thinking about themselves as scientists, as having theories and testing those theories. So there's lots of, we can go on and on about different kinds of domains and skills, sharing materials, sharing space. Yep. Mathematizing, says Jen. Perfect. And so just a little moment to just make visible that for young children, this is what learning is like. They're engaging in a play-based experience, and they were developing skills and knowledge across domains and across subject areas, as well as dispositions. So let's take that idea of the integrated nature of learning, and now we're going to zero in on language and literacy. Okay, so we're going to show a video that's what is about 3.5 minutes or so, and this is from our dear colleague, Dr. Helen Mignatis. She is a professor at the University of San Francisco, and her areas of expertise are supporting new teachers to learn about young children's literacy learning. She teaches the class on emergent literacy and how children learn how to read. She also has expertise in early childhood. So she's the perfect person to speak to that continuum from preschool all the way up through 3rd grade. And she's going to give us some things to think about around early language and literacy. We'd like you to take, as you're watching this video, just take down some notes about things you notice, what's capturing your attention, any questions you have, any reactions that come up for you. And I'm just going to invite my fellow colleagues on the panel to do the same. And then we're going to talk about the video on the other side. So let's see if we can pull it up now. Okay.
This is Helen Mignatis from the University of San Francisco. I'd like to share 5 ways we can support children's emergent literacy. As early childhood educators, you see literacy emerging every day as preschoolers read stories to stuffed animals and toddlers turn the pages of board books. This contrasts with the idea that a child is ready to read when they have certain skills. Children are ready when they have exposure to literacies in their home communities, guidance by caring adults, and there's a system in place that supports their health and well-being. Our students' home literacies may look different than the ones in our own homes, but that doesn't mean they're not happening. First, young children need the opportunity to play at literacy. We provide access to materials as shown in these photos, time for free child-initiated play, and time for collaborative play between children and adults. Time, space, materials, and talk support the development of oral language underlying the development of reading and writing. Second, we fill children with the sounds of language, talk between children and talk between children and adults, and singing. Singing familiarizes children with the sounds of language. And reading, predictable books where children can chime in on repeated phrases, storybooks that introduce characters, feelings, and situations, informational text that builds background knowledge, and very importantly, books that provide mirrors of children's experiences with characters that look like them in situations that are familiar to them. Third, playing with sounds to develop phonological awareness, which means hearing and manipulating sounds in oral language. It's rhyming, clapping out syllables, recognizing words with the same beginning sound, breaking words up into individual sounds and blending them back together. This ability to hear individual speech sounds transfers across languages. That means that caregivers and families can do wordplay in their home language, and that skill will be there for children when they're learning to read in English. Fourth, even more important than ABCs and letter names are letter sounds. Using children's names is the most meaningful way to talk about letter sounds because they notice when someone has their letter or when their letter appears in a book. Talking about the sounds that letters make sets children up to realize that print represents speech, a huge milestone in literacy learning that's needed for phonics to have any meaning. Fifth and last for now, children need time, materials, and support for drawing. Children write before they read. Talking leads to drawing. Drawing leads to writing. As early childhood educators, you have listened as children told a story as they drew, taking dictation by asking a child to tell you about their story, and responded when a child asked you how to write mom or love. Children are authors before they are readers. Early childhood educators are sometimes asked whether emergent literacy can be accelerated to meet the demands of kindergarten. We answer by asking, what would be the consequences of spending little time on the activities I just described? Without these foundational experiences, children might struggle later with reading and writing because they aren't hearing those individual speech sounds, or don't see the connection between speech and print, or don't see writing as a way to communicate their own ideas, or don't feel a part of a community of readers and writers. The experiences we provide in early childhood education are some of the most long-lasting experiences children will have. Thank you.
Okay, let me go past here. Okay, so let's take a minute before we open it up to our panel to just walk through some of those ideas. But first, I'd love to just give space to our participants to share in the chat. What caught your attention? What did you notice? Did you have any strong reactions to anything that was shared? Maybe you agreed, maybe you disagreed with something, or you found yourself wondering and having a question. So let's see, I'm going to try to catch some of these. That children are authors before they're readers. And I don't know if everybody knew that writing starts with children feeling that they have stories to tell, that writing starts with us paying attention to children and inviting them to speak about their experiences. I love that. I love the concept of being allowed to play with literacy. Their names, they're so important. It's so motivating, you know, to be able to use a name for something. We have in the book on the Principles as Early Learning Leaders a story with a young child who was rocking a baby to sleep, and David Santino, he's rocking the baby and the baby got to sleep. He was doing this in his pretend play, but he really wanted, when the baby woke up, to be able to play with the baby when the baby was awake, and to be able to feed the baby. And he wasn't sure what to do. And his teacher said, I wonder if we could just put a little saving card with your name next to the baby while the baby sleeps. And it was the first time David had really tried to write his name. And it was very motivating for him to put down his emergent writing first letter for his name next to the baby. The experiences we provide are some of the most long-lasting experiences. I love when she talks about that, the opportunity cost of trying to push academics and curriculum that's going on, you know, for older children, trying to push that down, and the roots of the tree can't grow, and then we wonder why the literacy tree isn't thriving 3 years later. So children need time. Print represents speech. I heard myself saying, says Jody, yes, 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 lots of snaps. Connecting to wordplay in the home. Absolutely. You can see the absolute connection. We'll hear about that in just a second, to home language and the importance of supporting home language. Being very intentional about exploring letter sounds and letter names, and having easy access to materials, intentionally playing with language, creating words through rhyming. I mean, all of that, down by the bay where the watermelon grows, and singing songs that play with words that are playful and joyful and fun. Not not flashcards, right? But something that's embedded in the joyfulness of children's everyday experiences. Oh, Chicka Chicka Boom Boom. Is that the best book ever for playing with sounds and letters and repetition and opportunity costs? Beautiful. Well, thank you for sharing those. And again, as we move into, Christopher says one more thing. I think the intentionality of connecting play and literacy, keep pushing this learning. Yes, absolutely. Keep pushing it up, these best practices all the way through elementary, because you're absolutely right. There's not anything that says at the end of pre-K or TK that this kind of learning stops. It's best for children all the way through the continuum. So thank you for reminding us of that, Christopher. So we're going to now open it up for our panel. We're going to talk about some of these ideas. We want to keep inviting you to share your insights, your questions in the chat, and we feel like we're all in conversation together. So for my colleagues here, we had Helen started with this idea of literacy emerges at birth and it grows in our context of our everyday homes, our schools, and our communities through authentic experiences. And I want to share this one as well, and then open it up to see who wants to speak to this. But what makes a child ready to read? This is a really different idea, isn't it? Of readiness when we think about all of those elements of the child, the whole child, the child with caring adults, and not just the child and family, but children in a system that is supporting them. So we're taking the idea of the child being ready to thinking about our schools, our programs need to be ready for children. We're kind of flipping that. So let me just see which one of my colleagues wants to start us off by, when you think about these ideas and you think about inclusion, what's coming up for you? What do you want to add?
I can add, excuse me, oral language development is the foundation for language and literacy skills. And I think we heard Dr. Helen talk about songs, talk about reading with phrases, all of that, and having those interactions. I think interactions are such a key component of oral language development and critical thinking skills. One of something that really connected me to the story that you read earlier about that interaction of children. There was a lot of language going on in there, solving problems and predicting, all of those skills. And then if we are as educators facilitating that as well, to really take it to the next level, because that will be the foundation for language and literacy. Like maybe afterwards have children draw what they did and then take a dictation, as Dr. Helen said, so connecting that language, the oral language to the written. So, and then they can see it, maybe creating a book from the experience, that experience that they had is very genuine and in a very play-based environment, which is what we are looking for developmentally appropriate practices. That I got that phrase or that a sentence that authors before they are readers. Children are authors before they are readers. And that's one of our participants who said, and that really stood out to me because it's true. They start connecting the oral language to the written. And then that's where you can say you are an author, you're an illustrator without pushing, drilling all of those concepts in a very organic manner.
Thank you, Elena. Who wants to build on that?
Yeah, I'd like to add to that, Julie.
Really?
Elena, absolutely agree with everything that you said and the importance of oral language. I think a lot of this, and it was really interesting, what Helen was saying and what Julie, what you mentioned about like changing what we define as ready, and even changing the word, what does really academic, to me, I'm looking at the children, the boys building, and it's very academic. So a lot of this is how do we translate the language, right, between the ECE system and the traditional K-12 or TK-12 world, because what impacts it is we've got parents who have grown up in this as well. And so they are asking, because they don't know, they're asking for homework packets, right? They're asking for worksheets because that's what they see that we do in the upper grades, which, as you already noted, we don't even think that should be good for anybody, any child that's in the upper grades. So I really think that a lot of this is really having a whole system change about what really building literacy means, and changing this sort of the approach to how we do it. It's not about flashcards. It's not about packets. It's really about these incredible experiential sort of learning activities and that oral language. And I do really love, and I noticed in the chat that the idea of that author, and what really kids can do if you let them do it in the super child-friendly, developmentally appropriate way. And it ends up actually being what we used to call, or still call in the K-12 system, rigorous, right? So I really think that language issue is one of the big ones for us as a whole system to really dig into.
Well, let's make it real, because I really want to think about, I love those ideas of let's make it child friendly. Let's think about readiness as involving rigor and joy and creating a foundation. I want to think about two things. So in this picture here, we think about how we can be very intentional about supporting children's literacy development through play, so in authentic ways. But and that you see here, these are things that Dr. Mignata's talked about: access to materials, having time to play. If children are having to move from activity to activity every 15, 20 minutes, thinking about for those boys, they might have just gotten the blocks set up, maybe been able to roll a couple of times down their block structure, but they certainly wouldn't have had time to problem solve what was going on as the ball was coming out. And the rich learning was in the problem solving and the trial and error and the thinking together and then changing the rules, right? So time is really important. And this piece about, we'll talk about this even more explicitly in a few slides from now, but there's time for children to engage in their play driven by their learning goals, and then for adults to scaffold and support and collaborate with children in their play. So I want to open this up, and I saw, Barbara, you looked excited to speak to this. I don't know if you want to start us off.
Sure.
But think about, how do we have to arrange environments, and what types of activities do we want to be thinking about to support literacy through play that actually is inclusive of all of our learners?
Yeah, so I think that the way that we set up the environment is important for all children, right? So how are we ensuring that, it's organized, it's predictable, kids have time to actually, teachers are making sure that they're like working with kids on how to use the materials, those kinds of things, that there's a sense of belonging, that they own sort of the classroom, that it's their classroom. But I think in terms of materials, we also have to be really cognizant of the different capabilities and learning styles of the different children that we have, especially when we're thinking about inclusion. So thinking about, having different size markers and crayons and pencils to different types of, scissors, or how are we also putting the paper on a table? Some kids might need it to be propped up, those kinds of things. Some kids might need it to be taped to the edge of the table so that they can cut it, or they can actually, depending on their core strength. So there's all these things in terms of all the different development that kids are, that we have to really think about what are the needs of the students that we have in the classroom, and that we're then providing materials so that they can feel capable and have a sense of agency for that. I think the visuals that we also have in the classroom are really important as well. lots of visual supports, ways to step, task, how do you, even do a task? Those kinds of things are really, really important for our students, especially if they have different learning styles and or different developmental abilities.
So thank you, Barbara. Can I ask you first to give us an example of one or two visuals that you're talking about? Just kind of describe that. And then let me just give you a little kind of on the spot request. So here's three different examples where literacy has been introduced. So in this one, this is Ryan Curata, a TK classroom in Sonoma County, where they set up a message center. And you can see there's some pens and some different kinds of paper here. The children can draw or write messages to one another throughout the day and put them in their cubbies or deliver them, I suppose, right? That's one example. This was an example where the children were doing dramatic play. They had a restaurant and they did not have any customers coming to their restaurant. And so here was one thing, they were talking about it. The teacher overheard them and suggested, here's that collaborative play, the extension, said, why don't we write a sign that says your restaurant is open? So they used some developmental spelling here for open, and then they brought in home language, abierto. The teacher also heard them talking about recipes and brought in this old Molly Katzen recipe book where there's 4 pictures and just 1 or 2 words where the children could learn to read those words through environmental text. And then they created their own recipes with their own pictures and words, which was even better. And the final example here is the children putting together a welcoming sign for a family engagement evening in this program. So going back to what I was asking, if you could share what a visual support looks like, and then if you could take any of these examples of how literacy was introduced and think about what would go through a teacher's mind as they thought about introducing that in an inclusive way, like thinking about a range of learners. How might you think about coaching a teacher with these?
Sure. So I think the visuals are really a way, there's different ways that we can use visuals in a classroom. And I think it really depends on your students. Like some kids really gravitate and really board maker visuals are really, really good for them. Those kinds of visuals. Some like to see actual like clip art, kind of things. With bigger text, I think text is really important so that they can connect the visual with the writing. These little drawings, some kids might really gravitate towards that. So I think you have to have like a variety of different types of visuals based on the needs and what kids are gravitating towards. I hate to say like only one way works. We've had to kind of think about, some kids really also like to see pictures of other children, and then they can kind of see themselves in the picture and say, that's me, even though it's not them, kind of a thing. So I think it depends on what the needs are. And I think like pairing the language with the visual, making it really, in good size font, obviously translating it into home languages is very, very important. And then I would say that, I think these are all really beautiful examples of literacy rich experiences. I think that if you are really helping kiddos, and I would say that this is for any child, is like maybe having some sentence starters, like on, visuals, of how to start a sentence, having alphabet charts with pictures next to them, I think is really great. And then I think the materials, and some of the participants have put in really great examples. So chunky crayons, chunky pencils, loop scissors, those kinds of things. And then if kiddos are using their assistive technology devices, I think like also working with speech language pathologists. So if we're studying this, can you please load these things into the AAC devices so that the kids can then, if they need to, they can push a button and then they can add their to this welcome sign, or like Elena was saying about a collaborative like story that the whole classroom is creating, they can add their input that way.
Beautiful.
just want to add something quickly, if it's
Please
okay.
do, of
Yes,
course.
please.
Thank you. I love all the contributions from the panelists. They are fabulous, and I know I'm going to take a lot with me today. But I also want to add, I know I was talking about oral language development earlier, but also we need to be cognizant about the language needs that each child might have. Like you were talking about assistive technology, right? And so maybe will be sign language, maybe whatever. So we have to just be very aware of where the needs of every child in our classroom or in our setting. So when it comes to language development, we have to make sure that they are acquiring new vocabulary, new language, expanding their sentences where they are, and using the visuals, using the technology, using whatever we need in order for them to move forward in their goals. So I just wanted to put that out there. It's like, wait, we are
Thank
talking a little
you.
bit about inclusion.
Yes.
Yes, absolutely.
And not everyone is going to be able to do outputs verbally, right? So we have to think about how else children can add their thinking about the material, what we're studying in a classroom. Yes.
And
Heather,
then just also,
does that cue you? Who did I just cut off though? Go ahead and finish and then we'll invite the SIP team.
I was just going to say, and then thinking about how we support not just literacy in the classroom, but also in our outdoor areas. And so as, you know, students are out playing or the ability to bring some of these materials outside, outside is always a great way to build those conversations and the singing and the writing that could happen, books and things like that, that can be a part of just your outdoor learning, aside from just being in the classroom. The other thought is also, how do we make sure that our parents, as they're also trying to teach literacy in a home environment, how do we make sure that they understand that there doesn't necessarily have to be these very expensive toys and devices and things like that, but oftentimes pencil, paper, the different size markers, things like that are very creative and productive ways to also get our kids very excited about literacy.
Thank you. Such a important addition. So SIP team, anything you want to say here? I know you're going to talk in a minute about UDL, but anything about that's coming up for you now?
Just a deep appreciation for what's being shared, and the fact that literacy it doesn't stand alone. It lives in everything. So having literacy as a part of every single context of the day is one aspect, and then the inclusivity of literacy. So some of these really great examples, I'll add a quick one. I was in a classroom, and it was within the context of what kids were experiencing, and they were playing restaurant and started to do ordering. And so the teacher started taking pictures and making menus. And then not until we experienced it by observation did we realize, oh, some children may not be able to verbalize how to make the order. So how do we set that up by way of visual, by way of their AC devices, so that they can participate fully as well as learning fully? So, so thank you for that sharing.
I love that. Can you just say a little bit more, just to make even more visible for everybody what that looked like? So what was the next step to make it inclusive?
So the next step was they added to the bottom of the menu pictures of something that might have been on their AAC device of I want whatever the item was requesting, and it was removable so that they could use it. So we had to adapt the menu a bit, which was great, because then they can pick the item that they're requesting. And you watch children become independent in reciprocating with the child, and the adults getting to back off. Oh, look, he wants, or you want more, and I'm going to get you this one. Here's your French fries. Here's your this. So it's really nice to see that independence gained in social interactions.
Love that. Thank you for continuing with that. So I'm going to skip ahead because Elena, you have talked a lot about this playing with language, but you have a couple of slides that are specific for support emergent bilingual, multilingual children and including them. So I wanted to just invite you to speak to these.
Thank you. It seems like I've been talking so much. Sorry. But I work for the Talk Project and I have my perfect job because I talk a lot. Anyhow, here is what we know, what research really says. There are a lot of myths about, even for our children in our who are dual language learners, that keeping the home language and supporting with English language acquisition might confuse them. There are so many myths about that, and now research is really make it clear for many of us that that's not the case, and that includes our children with disabilities or developmental suspected delays. There is a wonderful book that I feel like is my Bible. I don't know if you can. Oh no, you cannot see it because I have the background. It is the National Academy of Science, Engineers, and Medicine. It has a lot of recent research, and I really depend on that and many state Department of Education research as well. That children with disabilities will not get confused if we support their home language. And I want to quote what this wonderful book is telling us. The languages do not compete by result in linguistic, cognitive, but results in linguistic, cognitive, social, emotional, and cultural gains for children with disabilities. So needing to maintain the home language is something so critical for us educators to keep in mind, because not only we saw that in the previous speakers in slides, that it's something that is it really has meaning to our dual language learners, to emerging bilinguals, supporting the oral language, supporting the new vocabulary, and that is the language of the soul. That's what they begin to really make sense of the world. And therefore, it is very critical that we support their home language, whatever they are, and the acquisition of second language, English. So, research tells us that children with disabilities have the capacity to learn more than one language while acquiring English. Children with disabilities may need individualized supports in their home language, in English, in sign language, or in other ways to communicate effectively. So that, as you know, and I think Julie was speaking to that they that language cross transfer language occurs once the children have that foundation in their home language. When they're ready to acquire the English, they will have all those skills in place. So that is something to keep in mind, that that our children with disabilities do not get confused. On the contrary, we support the social emotional of who they are, and that keeping that identity that is so important for our children that we have in our settings. So with that, maybe I'll go to the next one and see what we can do as educators, right? Here is a little picture similar to what I was pointing out earlier on the having those artifacts in the classroom that really has a meaningful connection to each of the children. Like, let's say, like for me, it was like the textiles. If I see a textile in a class, so it will make me feel comfortable. It's like, oh, that is for my country. I know this is a safe place. If we have the home languages posted in our classroom, that home languages, they are represented in our classroom, the children that are enrolled in our classroom, not just something that we find on the internet and it's like, oh, this is wonderful, we're going to fulfill this. No, we need to be very authentic and really making that a safe environment to every single child in our setting. So creating a cultural and linguistic responsive environment has to do with the home language, very, very critical that we have that in our hearts, in our minds. Work closely with families and other professionals. And I think that's what we refer earlier, one of our panelists, like really working with the specialists. What is it that what are the goals that the children are working on? How are we going to connect those in the home language and support the families, working with the families closely? So we have a very continuing learning for the child. So being aware of our own biases and assumptions. What are those assumptions that we have? Maybe we're thinking, oh, well, English is the only language that they will encounter later on, and therefore this is how we're going to teach them, even though the research is out there. So let's go by what research tells us. And policies are now in place that we can support the home language and acknowledge everybody in our classrooms. So just to keep that in the back of our minds about dual language learners, emerging bilinguals or multilinguals. As I said earlier, there are many beautiful terms to embrace diversity and embrace every single child in our classrooms. So with
Thank
that,
I'm so glad you brought that up, and I'm going to just be really honest with everybody here. I, as a parent, was given advice. My children, now my youngest is 20, so this wasn't that long ago. And because she had some early language delays, I was actually advised by lots of experts and told, stop speaking Spanish to her, only speak English because it will confuse her. So these ideas of older ideas, that it will harm and it will delay, it wasn't that long ago. So you might still be hearing that. And I think it's really important that you brought that up. It's not just something we're saying, but there's an evidence base behind it now. So I would love, thank you for sharing that. I want to take a minute to just hear, we were going to do this later, but I feel like there's a time for it right now as well, to hear from Dr. Thompson, Tabitha Thompson, to just lean in and let's think about what we've been listening to here about setting up our environment, about supporting home language. I just want you to take a minute, and again, we'll come back to this as well, but just say, what are you hearing as an administrator are some of the things that need to be in place, those mindsets for administrators to support what you're hearing here?
I'm hearing great things. I'm hearing that people are starting to understand the benefits of inclusion, which is awesome. Wherever your program is in terms of setting it up, whether you are just beginning or you've been doing it for just a little while, just being mindful that it benefits not just our students that may have whatever learning disability or diagnosis, but it also supports our general ed students in terms of building that empathy, that capacity to be leaders in the classroom and things like that. So if you're an administrator thinking, okay, what's my first step? How do I just go ahead and dive in? Really having those courageous conversations with your staff to make sure that they're bought in, to make sure that they understand this is something that we're doing to support all children, and then just really leaning in on what is it that they need to possibly get over that hump. So a lot of times we hear from educators that they feel like they have to have some special tool box, that they're not special ed teachers, they don't feel like they'll be good enough to support our students. And so just really leaning in on those conversations around fear, because oftentimes that's what's holding us back from taking that initial steps. So lots and lots of conversations about how can we just take that first step, and then knowing that it'll be messy, right? Everything that we start isn't always clean and nice and tidy when we first begin it. Doesn't mean, however, we can't start, get a little bit messy, come back to the drawing board and say, okay, what next? What can we improve on? And so just really encouraging any administrator who is thinking of or just kind of starting to get their feet wet with building inclusive settings to really go ahead and take that first step. Thinking about oftentimes when we do any kind of changes that we think are specifically for our students with a different type of learning ability, oftentimes it's actually good for all the kids. So if you are venturing to going to one way in terms of toys or a setup of a classroom, things like that, chances are it'll land really well for all of the students in your classroom. So just spending that extra time, again, highly encourage lots of conversation around mindset. What is it that your teaching teams will need in order to implement? And then just being mindful that as we take the risk, it's okay for us to go back and revise as needed because it won't be perfect that first time.
Thank you. Such important frames for us to think about as we keep going forward. I'm going to skip through a few slides and move us. Oh, I do have to show you this slide. Yes, this is Dominic, and I just love Dominic, who is learning about reading. He's got his book. Look at all this book knowledge. He's pointing to the title. He's retelling the story as he's tracking it with his fingers. And he gets to the end and he looks up and he says, "The end." The most, I look at that and I think he's learning so much in this classroom where he's being read to each day. There's books available for him to retell the story. He's encouraged to retell the story. But most importantly, he's learning to see himself as somebody who is a reader and that reading is pleasurable. So I love that story. But let's keep going here. And Julie Montali, you are going to make some connections for us about thinking about all these good roots and how we can see connections up through the early grades.
Thank you, Julie. So I'm going to be honest, I am a sucker for anything in the arts realm. So this was a little bit of my selfish way many years ago to bringing that into, something I loved personally into professional use. And you know what? I was pleasantly surprised by so many of the byproducts that came from this incredible sort of marriage between arts and UDL. And they're actually very natural partners. If you think about, we think about the multimodal ways of representing, we think about the many ways of expression and action, and then of course, just that natural engagement. The arts really are an amazing way, especially when you bring in this whole idea that Heather said about play as a vehicle. It all connects so beautifully together. And so I bring this to you as a way of thinking about how kids can build that thinking muscle before the things that we ask them to do, and we call it close reading in early elementary, where they're able to start to be independent readers and sort of analyzing and comparing and contrasting and finding different things in what we typically just call text. Well, here's a broader definition for you of text. So looking at an image, a painting, or really pretty much anything. You can use anything you'd like. You can even use the cover of a book that is a great illustration, because many times, right, you've got children's books that have these great illustrators. But this was really fun to use actual, master's prints. I had the chance to see this one when I had a visit to France. And this is called Eye in the Village. It's by a French painter named Marc Chagall. And there's all kinds of stuff going on. And so what we do with our youngest, and this is one of those beautiful connects for as kids get older who are doing more independent writing, they can write their thoughts. But this works beautifully with, and I'm going to, you're going to laugh at this one, but actually 3-year-olds. Well, I've done this with 3-year-olds, 3, 4, 5, 6, beautiful. And we do sort of an artful thinking routine that you can see here: see, think, and wonder. Now, it's not super structured. Kids are just kind of saying what they see, what they think, what they wonder. And generally, I don't have kids or adults, it doesn't matter. You can do this with all ages. You can do it at a dinner party if that, floats your boat, because it is kind of fun. But don't feel like you have to just do the C's first, or just do the thinks, and just do the wonders. Generally, I start with what do you see, or what's happening in this picture? Barbara, thank you. That definitely connects to the VTS, right? What's happening in this picture? You can do it that way too. But looking for C. So here, let's do a little practice with you all. See if you can, if you move the gallery people on your Zoom over to the right, and you can sort of make your screen a little bit bigger on that slide. Go ahead and put in the chat, what do you see? What do you see in that painting? You can just throw them in the chat as you'd like. And maybe you're just seeing, great, I love it. We've got Tabitha started us off, Barbara, thank you. So kind of just looking, what do you see? You see a tree. I see a big green guy is what I usually get from kids. I see, right? Like they love the green guy. I see, and sometimes then they start, as this starts going, I love it. I see the crowds. Once somebody kicks it off, this is what happens with the kiddos too, right? Then we start going into, well, what does that make you think? And so then we start to get more oral language and wonderings. I often will just let it go. I don't typically correct if there's something, maybe if there's something I might say, oh, that's actually a goat or something like that. But generally, this is just building that oral language, and they're practicing reading the print. And then we start to get into, well, I wonder, what do you wonder? What do you wonder? And so they'll come up with, well, I wonder why she's upside down. I wonder what is she playing? Is that music? And sometimes I will get a frame, and this is a lot of fun, and focus, especially since this one's got a lot going on. I may get a digital frame or even just like an actual frame, and with nothing in the middle, and just frame kind of a zoom in on pieces. And this is a really cool thing to bring kids' focus and attention to one piece. Some children are not going to be able to tell you, so they want to come up and point. That's great. If they want to use the frame itself and show, this is what I'm zooming in on, I think that's a beautiful way to go. It's interesting. We don't often hold kids to the expectation that 3s and 4s and 5s can actually learn to sort of give and take in those situations. And of course, sometimes then you've got the whole massive crowd coming up and, okay, well, we're gonna, I know you're so excited about this. Let's, kind of, well, I'll sit back down kind of thing. And they're like, oh, okay. So it's fun, it's joyous, and they're really, and then taking it to, if you go to the next slide, you can kind of see a way that we take this to writing. And as we learned in the video, and Elena, you definitely capitalized on that. I love this idea of the draw, the talk, and the dictate. So you can see, this is an example of TK actually, where we looked at the Marc Chagall painting, and we also, I'm sure you recognize Starry Night, the Van Gogh, and we compared and contrasted, and we decided, pick the one that you like the best. And often we like to talk about some things about the author, or the artist, right? The painter. One of my favorite that's actually not on here is actually Matisse. Another one is Frida Kahlo, because we are able to talk about painters who had challenges. So for instance, as Matisse got older and his eyesight went away, it was very hard for him to paint. And so he's famous for his he painted with scissors is what he called it. And the kids loved that. At one point when he was in his hospital bed, he put a charcoal piece on a long pole and drew on the wall. So getting some of the biographies in there is really, it's just very affirming to kiddos that, you can have, these challenges, and let's turn them into actual successes and really positive things. And they want to try these things out, which I think is great. But this last point about the writing, the drawing, the dictating is that little children can really come up with very sophisticated things, and they can really understand and think. They learned about Van Gogh and how he applied his painting, very, thick, very textured. And so you can see, and that's what he said. My Van Gogh is my favorite. He paints fast with lots of texture. So we would practice in the air, painting furiously. And you can see, a little bit of the teacher being able to use this as a really great assessment tool as well. What is happening with this child's literacy knowledge? I can see these letter sound connections. I can see if this child is encoding, they're very likely decoding, right? Usually going hand in hand. So there's a lot to do with art. This is just one example, but I find that it is incredibly engaging for kiddos. It lends itself to a way that you can use UDL just very easily in your classrooms with your small children. And if you happen to have a little bit older kiddos, then when they are struggling and maybe they're not reading at a particular grade level, you still can keep them practicing the habits of close reading with things that you don't have to worry about decoding, right? As you're working on those things too. So lots to do with the arts. And don't forget, there's also, theater, there's music, and there are 3D art. So it's not just the visual arts, but here's one example that maybe you can put into your programs.
Thank you, Julie. I love that. Does any of the panelists want to add on or anything?
There was a question that Heather put in around like, what would you do to support communication with kiddos who may not be able to participate? So again, you can load some things into the AAC device ahead of time so that you could have very simple stems. So what you were saying earlier, Julie, about like, I see, I wonder, so that it could be right in front of them, I see, and then they could push on their AAC device, or maybe there's some elements in the actual painting that could be like maybe taken, blown up, and then they have choices down below them that they could point to, or maybe the actual painting is put down below near them so that they can point to it more easily. And then, just inviting them to be able to participate in different ways.
So thank you so much, Barbara. I'm wondering, just for the sake of us being inclusive here, and I want to make sure that everybody knows what you're sharing when you talk about the device, could you just tell us a little bit about that? Maybe there's folks who are joined, with us who aren't quite sure what you're referring to.
So there's different types, but things I think they're called Go Talks, and they're so like it's usually a pad. It's you can carry it. It's and then it's loaded in with different visuals, and then the speech therapist will put in language. So if they want to say apple, they point it, and somebody has pre-recorded on their apple or horse or whatever the words are, depending on, snack time and for them, the different routines of the day. So I'm just saying, so that's one thing. There's also switches. That's like one button and you push it and there's an output. So it's somebody speaking so that they can have language output, so that child can communicate verbally if they're not able to themselves.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Anybody else want to add on anything to this, these few slides, or should we move on?
If there is time, I would like to add again. I am. I just love the integration of the arts. Many times that is like forgotten and like, let's draw, let's paint, but bringing exposure to our little ones is so important. I just want to share a little bit about an experience. I hope I'm not taking too much time, but all of this also that will be exposure to the to art will be like a little invitation, putting it maybe in the classroom and just talk about it. And one occasion in my experience was that the children were interested in the flowers. They were like at this time of year, all the blossoms were falling and they were running around. So the teacher took that interest from the children and took it to the next level into the classroom, and then talk about the life cycle of the flowers based on that interest of the children. Science, she did science, literature, literacy. And then the beauty of it was that they scheduled a community garden walk. Parents were invited, they all went to the community, and guess what? There was lots of irises, beautiful irises, big purple irises. And then I had in mind, it's like, let's make a big focus on this. Look at children. And then when we got back, we investigated Van Gogh and the irises, and then they had real irises, like a still life, and then they painted irises, and then they share about that experience because it was very concrete. They went to the garden, and then now how can we bring the arts into it? And it was just so beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. It is to see the exposure of the arts at a very early age.
Thank you, Elena. That's beautiful. Julie, did you want to add something?
Just that one last quick thing is what I really have found, Elena, is exactly what you're talking about. And what it does is it lends itself really to that voice and choice. So you've got that individual piece, but you also have really cool opportunities for collaborative art where kids can actually participate in it in different kinds of ways. And what I love to do is tell the story about Matisse, because when he really couldn't see enough to paint, and he was doing this, painting by scissors, he had assistants who would go and put the shapes up on the wall, and then he would direct, no, I want that one this way, or I want that one over here. So you can actually reenact a lot of these stories that we tell. And there's Faith Ringgold there, one of the reasons she became an artist because she had health issues when she was young. So she was with her grandmother and learned to quilt and sew. So what I think is really motivating is to know the stories of some of these folks who became these world famous painters and artists. And when maybe they couldn't do it one way, they switched gears and did it a different way. And I just, it's lends itself really well to this inclusive work and the just UDL.
I love that. And it's a perfect segue into the next piece that I want to guide us to, which is talking about the continuum of play-based learning. I'm going to say a few words, then invite any of the panelists to share your thoughts about these different stops on the continuum. Of course, please feel free to keep adding in the chat box. It's so rich and wonderful, the ideas that you're adding there. And then SIB team, I'm just kind of queuing up that you're going to really take this play-based learning and contextualize what that means for universal design for learning. So that's where we're going next. So I wanted to just make sure that we had a chance when we're thinking about setting up inclusive environments for young learners, that yes, we know that there are certain things that support their brains to develop optimally, that we want them to be able to engage, that play-based learning is it is the most optimal way for children to learn because they can be engaged, they can interact, they can build relationship, they can touch things and interact with materials like the scientists that they are, and explore and question and test theories and all sorts of good things. But I don't know about all of you, when I was first trained in play and its role in supporting young children, it was kind of like, I don't know, it was a big concept of play, but it wasn't really broken down into this nuanced continuum in the way you see in front of you. And I was trained as an early educator to be really thinking about this end of the continuum, the child self-determined play. That was where my sweet spot was. And for those of you who are in early childhood and have taken allowed child development classes, that's probably, when we talk through it in just a second, this is probably where you're going to find your comfort and your strength. I won't speak for you, but for me, this leaning into adults joining in children's play and supporting them and scaffolding and thinking about how observing carefully what their interests are, how they're playing in their internally motivated way, and then thinking about how to support that child and extend their play in certain ways to help them develop particular skills or to achieve particular learning goals. When I was first trained, again, adults entering children's play was like, you don't do that, But I want to say that we've really moved in our research, in our understanding of what supports children to thrive. And what we've learned is that these two together, child self-initiated play, we often think about that as free play, along with adult-child collaborative play, that supports children best, and they should be spending the most of their time on that to the continuum. But there is a role for adult planned and directed play, and especially for children, and I'm going to ask the SIP team to speak to this, children who need a lot of adult direction in order to be able to access these other kinds of play. So let's take a look at what that means. So child self-determined play, and I want you to be thinking about in your programs, where's your strength and where's your learning edge? For those of you who are coming in as maybe administrators in elementary school, or you've taught older grades and you're just beginning to learn about preschool age children or kindergarten, this is probably a learning edge for you. And but your comfort zone is probably that adult child collaborative play and the adult directed and planned. So everybody has a learning edge and everybody probably has a strength along this continuum. But for the child self-determined, the child is in charge of the learning goal. So they're deciding what materials to play with and how to use those materials. The adults are often observing, they're listening, they're noticing, they might be documenting for assessment, and they're thinking about how to extend and support the child in their play. We've seen several examples of this today. We saw this with the message center. The children are deciding if they want to participate and if they want to draw, if they want to write, who they want to give it to. They have a lot of direction in the use of those materials and the learning goal. Here's a little girl who has drawn a picture of her play that day, and she's sharing with her friends at the table. But she's in charge of that activity. Really, really important for children to have this every day. And this adult-child collaborative, or sometimes it's referred to as guided play. Remember, it's those two. So the child self-determined and adult-child collaborative, those two together is what the research shows is the most valuable for children in early childhood years. But adults can give different levels of guidance from minimal to moderate to more intensive. And again, you've seen some examples of that, with this being in this play, probably a minimal to a more moderate, observing the children, noticing their interests, and building from that by suggesting the use of the pens and paper to draw the sign, and then even bringing in the recipe book. So helping to scaffold, but always starting with the child's interests and the children's play and building from that. And then this other end, the adult planned and directed, you can imagine lots of examples of this, where the adult comes up with the activity, the children are following along. Here, the children are engaging in a freeze dance. And so they're listening, they're stopping when the song tells them to freeze. They're practicing self-regulation skills, listening skills, they're having fun, they're having a brain break, and so on. We could also imagine with literacy, letter bingo would be an example of something like this. But what I want to stop and say is that, and SIP team, you're going to take it from here. Actually, why don't I ask the colleagues on the panel if you want to say anything about this continuum, and then we'll have the SIP team sort of introduce UDL as aligned with this. But I do want to say that the adult planned and directed, sometimes adults for children who need access to play and play activities, they're going to need more adult planning and direction in order for them to actually be able to get to this kind of play, or in order for them to be able to have this kind of play. So anything that anybody on the panel wants to add to this before we do a deeper dive into UDL?
I'll just add that I think it's important for us to be mindful of the balance between child and adult directed play. Sometimes it is necessary for us to kind of guide them and get the conversation going and get excited about the activity. And then sometimes it's important for us to lean out so that they can lean into the play amongst peers. So just kind of knowing your classroom and knowing your students and what they're capable of, and when they need a little bit of a nudge and when they don't need you to nudge is going to be extremely important. So just that balance.
I love that. And if, people will often say to me, how much, and I see, Christopher, your question, you wonder, is there an over adult planned and directed play in some spaces? Absolutely 100%. And that's why I was saying that Let's go back here to where you are in the continuum. There are classrooms today that 90% of the time is the adult planned and directed, and at the end of the day, they'll give 10 minutes of child self-determined. And we actually need from just research and what we know, I mean, you can just look at the kids. They're more joyful when it's flipped the other way. They might be compliant here, but you're not going to see the same level of engagement and joy, and the neurons aren't growing to their absolute capability when that's the case. We want to flip it, and this should be 10% of the time, if that, with the caveat, if you have a child who needs more adult direction in order to be able to participate, and Barbara, I'm looking at you shaking your head, that's an exception, right? We're supporting the child to have access to this whole continuum. But yes, balance, and then absolutely, Christopher, we have many, many classrooms that find this is a huge learning edge for them to move to the left on the continuum. Barbara, do you want to join in?
Yeah, I think it all depends on your students. Obviously, if children have, physical needs, and you need to make sure that you're placing them in order for them to participate, or language, those kinds of things. And I would also think that, like, this is also really important for kiddos who need a little bit of support with, like, entering into play, sharing, conflict resolution, those kinds of things. But you don't want to hover, because I've also seen when adults are hovering, then it can kind of elevate the tension in the space, and then it can actually cause more conflict. So I think, like, there's that balance of what Dr. Thompson said, Tabitha said, of like, when do I enter, when do I not? And I think we also have to be really mindful that if we're entering too much into children's play, like, there's that balance. We want to be facilitating it, but we also want to give children agency over taking risks, over learning what I can do, what I can't do, those kinds of things, because our kids, our kids are not growing up how I grew up, where you were unsupervised for a long, and playing outside and doing those things. We also want to be really mindful of that.
I thank you so much for saying that. And I want to just add, gosh, I will think of the name of who said this. I will think of it and share it out. But I love this quote, that when we as adults think that our job is to always do adult planned and directed, and that we assess the risk and the learning goal for children at all times, two things happen. We do not give children credit for what they are capable of. We underestimate what children are capable of. And we do the exact opposite, where we ask them to do things that they are not yet capable of. So we might give them a worksheet with an abstract assignment to connect a letter to its sound or something like this, and the children haven't had all this, the roots of literacy, they're not yet ready for that. But then when we scaffold the environment and control them, we don't allow them to have that rich problem solving and thinking and idea generation and risk taking and all that good stuff we saw in the block play and other examples that have come up today. So we need to, it's one of those things, remember when I said the early childhood system attaching to the public school system, there's a different image of child. And this is one of those places of growth and tension. It's scary, as we heard earlier, and we need to name that fear. It can be scary for folks who are used to being in control, to let go and cede control to children and give them agency and voice and choice. And yet that's at the heart of developmentally informed practice. So it's a big learning edge, and maybe just naming it, as we heard Dr. Thompson say earlier, name it and lean into it as a staff and support people to talk about it. Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to, is there anything anybody else wants to say on the panel before we have the UDL connections?
Julie, I just want to say one quick thing about around the principal thing, sort of understanding, right, the value of more child-centered play. So I've had some really great experiences running an early learning academy for principals, where we were really able to talk frankly about this. And we did a couple of sort of experimental little practicum assignments. one of my favorites is for them to go in, because they imagine early learning classrooms are those child-directed, sitting at the kidney table, and they might be playful activities, but they're absolutely the adult-driven activity. And like you said, there's nothing wrong with having some of that. It's just, is that all the play there is outside of 10 minutes? And so I would have them do something like that, and then go back into the same classroom and do more of that facilitated sort of teaching. Really what we're talking about is that adult child collaborative play. And inevitably after they change their minds, because I would have them sort of debrief on those two experiences and compare and contrast them. And always, and I'm talking hundreds of principals, came back with the same sort of learning is, oh my goodness, I had no idea the vocabulary that would come, the opportunities with the children. They were like different people. They took ownership, all of these wonderful things. And it took them actually experiencing it, because intuitively, they just didn't really think that that was what was going to happen. And so when we think about the vast majority of our site leaders do not come from the child development world, I can't blame them, but we've really got a big system change ahead of us. And so I love that we've got this group talking about it today.
I love it. And Christopher, when you said we're trying to bring back voice, choice, joy, child agency, and can I just say, we're trying to bring back teacher agency, because it's not just trusting children. We have to trust teachers and the adults who work with them, so that we are not saying, I'm going to teacher proof this with a script that you can read and I've thought through everything, but instead that's when a teacher becomes a technician. We want to bring back that teachers and educators are intellectual professionals who can observe their children, get to know their children, think about what's best for that child, and nuance and do the dance of what does this child need in this moment at this time. And you have a toolbox of strategies to draw from. So it's all of that. And I will say that, Christopher, there's a series that New America Foundation has put on that says this stuff that we're talking about developmentally informed play-based learning, it's not just for high quality early childhood. We need to push this from kindergarten and beyond. And they do a whole series on reclaiming early education. So yes, and your teachers' jobs are hard. Let's just take a moment to recognize that we so value educators, whether you are teaching in the classroom, support staff, an administrator, a coach. Like, this work is, you're changing the world because you're helping to support children to have these foundations that they're going to use for the rest of their life. And it's hard work. Yes, I want to acknowledge that.
Julie, I just wanted to add that I'm thinking about your keynote at the TK conference, Julie, when you talked about the teacher who said that, that the group of, observers came in and said, oh, we'll come back when there's learning happening. And that has really stuck with me so much, because we know that play is learning, and there's so much to do that. And going back to what Julie just said, how are we also getting principals, administrators, and top level people in districts into the room with those experiences that you're describing, Julie, so that they can really understand how much learning happens when children are playing. Because you could have a teacher that's like so excited to do it, and then their principal saying, well, that's not how we're teaching, kind of a thing. So I think there's that tension,
There's that tension. And as we have, this last little chunk, I want to make sure we get to talk about UDL, but can I just say that one of the best ways to do it is to have them learn it firsthand. And y'all said this, but I'm just going to remind you, in a county I went to, I started with the team there. We handed out Play-Doh. It was all superintendents, assistant soups, leaders, and we handed out the Play-Doh. We said, just get to know people at your table and just play together. We'll be starting in a few minutes. And then I had them debrief. What was that like? Oh, it was so relaxing. I love this. I feel regulated. I was stressed coming in here. Now I got to know my colleague. Oh, look at what I made. I made this cute little thing, and they were all sharing, and we debriefed. And I said, okay, we're going to do one more thing before we start. Now I want you, everybody, just use your Play-Doh. You can still sort of work in your groups, but just make a car, any kind of car, just make a car. And they got silent and they were sort of focused, and they're like, you could just see, and I debriefed a few minutes, nobody was talking to anybody, and I debriefed a few minutes later, and this principal raised her hand, and she said, I was so angry. Like, I wanted to make my little alien person, and then you told me I had to make a car, and I don't know about cars, and I don't like cars, and all of a sudden I was stressed, and I couldn't even talk to my colleagues because I'm having to concentrate on making the car. I said, bingo. Let's just hold on to that moment, because this is so brilliant, and you've experienced this firsthand. And yes, thank you, thank you, thank you for making visible the difference between adult directed, and I have all the agency and control, and you feeling welcomed into this environment with your voice, your strengths, your funds of knowledge, your brilliance. So, okay, I really am going to shift now to your slides, SIP team, and I don't know, Heather, if you're going to.
Yeah. Yep.
Okay.
What a wonderful conversation. And seriously, like the last 10 minutes have led us to this slide, right? Like UDL transforms the power structure in education to students. I think that this is such a perfect time for us to ground in this concept. When we think of what we're doing in the classroom, we have such ownership of it. It's my classroom, they're my lessons. We spend so much time intentionally planning for our kids and intentionally planning activities that are meaningful, but it's always important for us to say, who are these activities and lessons meaningful to? Is it because we're deeply invested in it and we love it and it's how we learned, and so that's the way that we're going to teach it? Or is it really planned around the individual kids in our classroom? Are we identifying the needs of our kids? Are we identifying barriers that exist? And universal design for learning provides a framework for us to work within and identify those barriers and mitigate those barriers. And oftentimes, even before we meet our kids, we can start implementing pieces and strategies of UDL in our practices in order to ensure that that power is really in the hands of our kids. We talked a lot about agency, and that's what we're talking about here, is handing back that agency to our students in order for them to make meaningful connections to whatever it is that we plan, and in order for us to recognize when something that we've planned may not have been the best way to present something or the best way to interact. So that's what universal design for learning really is. And on the next slide, I really just want to call out the powerful role of play in education. It talks a lot about the play-based learning continuum and adult roles in play. And you'll see here next to the image of the actual cover of that document, which is something that's linked in our Padlet. Next to it, we've taken that play-based learning continuum and we've turned it on its end. And over the next couple of slides, you'll see why. But you see the same concepts: adult planned and directed play, adult child collaborative play, and child self-determined play. But we've added on that left side of them, you can see those small tabs, and you might not be able to read what the tabs say, but I'll read them to you. That top one says access. In the middle, we have the word build. And then at the bottom, we have the word internalize. So on the next slide, when we get into talking about the universal design for learning frameworks, you can see that those tabs are also on the sides of the framework right here. And we really just wanted you to have a quick view where we could spend days talking about universal design. With our team who has had more experience talking about universal design for learning always told me, you're going to see this in everything and you're going to start living this. And so this is so true. I see universal design in everything, but really it's about engaging children in a meaningful way in whatever we're doing. It's about providing multiple means for kids to take in the information that we want them to learn, and allowing them multiple ways to show how they've learned. And you can see too, Julie, if you click once, we can see that top piece, it's all about providing access. And that's what we've talked about: access to materials, access to spaces and places. And then if you click again, you'll see the next piece is about building. And that's really handing over some of the agency and some of the decision making to our kids. And then that last one down there at the bottom, internalizing, being able to take agency, take control of their own learning and make their own decisions. And those are skills that we really want to see, not just in early childhood, but those are the things that we need in order to have those higher level thinking skills, in order to have those high executive functioning skills that we look for in people that we employ, right? So when we talk about across the lifespan, we're really building these skills that are going to support kids throughout their lifespan. And then when we go to the next slide, we put it all together. We put the play-based learning continuum next to the framework for universal design for learning, and we can see, and this is what we talked about too, adult planned and directed play is meant to provide that access, right? And that's where we live when we have children who need that more intensive support and that more direct support. But all the things that we do to provide access are meant to build those skills that are seen in that adult child collaborative play, and to hand over their agency and to be able to see them doing more on their own and making decisions on their own and getting to know themselves in the context of their learning. And then that very last piece, that internalizing piece where it's all child self-determined play, they have learned those skills, they've been able to access, they're starting to build it, and now they're internalizing. They're able to make decisions about play, they're able to work with each other, they're able to plan forward. And really the whole purpose of using universal design in our settings is to develop expert learners who are purposeful and motivated, resourceful and knowledgeable, and strategic and goal directed. Those are all things that we want to see in humans, in our community, in the places that we work, in the places that we live. And that's, this is a special thing about early childhood, is that we're building these skills, and we have such an amazing opportunity to support those skills in what we do and in our classrooms. And I just saw Michelle asked, is this on the Padlet? There's lots of universal design resources on the Padlet. Yes, so we do. And you have access to the slide deck as well. So I want to give Jessica some time to also speak to universal design as well.
And I just want to say thank you, Heather. You did well, because I am watching the time and we're losing folks. So thank you all for continuing on with us. And I think what's important for this as well is knowing that every individual child lives differently within this continuum and how you show up. So it doesn't mean one child's need of self-determined or self-directed play is always that way for them, but that's why it's important for us to know that in any one given moment, we are floating throughout that continuum of what we do. And so are they. And so always being aware and reflective of how we show up in their learning is so important. And I'm going to come back to tying this in to what we should be using all the time and referencing, which is our foundations. As we are looking at those preschool learning foundations and how we build our programs, that is how we should be building curriculum every year. As children come to our programs, it's based on them. And so those foundations are what we can lean into to understand how to show up. And in turn, that continuous improvement piece of utilizing that, going beyond just DRDP reporting, but looking at what is the DRDP showing us in return for individual students. And Heather, you actually had said that how does UDL help us plan individually? And we have tools also in the Padlet by way of our preschool learning foundations and the DRDP to get connected that help us do that. So I just want to say yay to UDL and play-based learning.
Terrific. Thank you. And we are coming to a close, and I feel like this is so lovely that that Dr. Thompson sort of started us earlier in thinking about this. What types of supports do we need to be successful in creating these inclusive environments that support every child to feel seen, heard, safe, engaged, and an authentic sense of belonging? So you said a few things. I don't know, Dr. Thompson, if we can have you just repeat those, or if there's other things that anybody on the panel wants to bring up. But let's close, with this sense of what needs to be in place so that we can see it, we can name it, and we can build that.
Absolutely. I'll reiterate the ability to have a safe space to take those risks, for it to be not so clean at times. And then also having your administrator be your partner in crime. So as you are building these inclusive settings, thinking through how to support students that may learn differently, making sure that your administrator is also aware of what the typical ECE classroom should look like. I put in the chat that principals are afraid of ECE until they figure out what it is that they need to look for. I being, again, one of the administrators that would say to others, hey, come walk alongside me, and to point out what it is that they needed to be looking for and why things look different in a preschool classroom versus first grade or second grade and those sorts of things. So I think having those observations of other classrooms, having those walk and talks where you can bring admin, including VPs and instructional coaches and things like that, into our settings so that they can learn is going to be a really huge deal for us. The more that we can get people that understand what they are looking for when they go into a classroom, the easier it is for our teachers to be able to explain and to feel comfortable taking those risks to have children lead activities and not always feeling like they have to be the king or the queens of classrooms. So really thinking about how to get your admin team on board, inviting them into classrooms, admin, feeling free to walk in and say, I don't know what I don't know, but I'm willing to learn. And so that's huge as we think about how to change really our systems into being a little more ECE friendly and more knowledgeable about what's happening in our classrooms.
I love that. And I'm going to just move us here. I just want you to see this wonderful book. We won't have time to have these reflection questions, but Anti-Racism and Universal Design for Learning, Building Expressways to Success. And I just pulled out some of the questions that the author asked us to think about, and it connects to what you just said, Dr. Thompson. So am I growing as a teacher or as an administrator? Am I learning? How do I know what students have taught me, which students have taught me something new? What was my response? And I want to imagine that students and teachers feel like each person in our learning community is worthy of sharing their brilliance. What would that look like? And we will let Sip take it from here. Is this the closing one? Yes, I think so.
I just want to say thank you so much.
Yes, thank you all.
Yeah, so we have another day of this on Thursday. We're going to dive deeper into play and math and STEM, and we're going to have other members of our panel joining us. And so please return, please come back with us on Thursday at 3 o'clock. Keep accessing that Padlet. And then if you go to that very next slide, Julie, that very last one that we have, take a look at all of our events. It's not too late to register for a lot of things that we still have going on this year. And then follow us on our social media because we have a lot of fun on our social media. So thank you again, everyone, for spending your time with us today. Thank you to our panelists. Can we just get like a huge round of applause for them? And we're really looking forward to continuing this conversation on Thursday at 3 o'clock. So thank you all.
Thank you all in collaboration doing this powerful work.
And the slide deck is located on the Padlet. So if you go into the Padlet, you'll see that the slide deck is there.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Everyone.